Okay, hello and welcome to our monthly virtual meeting. This month Brian Levy will be our speaker and his topic is Agile for Everyone. But before I introduce the speaker, I have a few announcements and some housekeeping issues. So let's go. Here is the agenda for today's from 7 to 10. I will be presenting the opening and announcements. 7:10, Brian Levy will be doing the keynote. 7:15, Agile for Everyone by Brian. 7:30, interactive Q&A and activity. 7:45, raffle, and 7:50, closing. And now for our announcements. We have a PMO roundtable on March 22nd, where the discussion will be around resource management. They're going to talk about what kind of in-house and other programs that your company uses in your portfolio. You know, do you use checklists or standard templates and that kind of thing? The event is free, but space is limited. And again, you can see it on our website. PNODN and Puget Sound Project Management Institute presents Manager-Employee Conflict, AKA Succeeding with Troubled Employees by Chris Crosby. That's on March 26th from 3 to 5. You'll get 2 leadership PDUs. It's a virtual event where you'll discover a step-by-step repeatable process to improve company performance, the difference between individual and systematic ways of viewing employee performance, and systematic factors that hurt performance yet are often overlooked. And then on March 31st from 6 to 7, we have Remotional Intelligence Series Sneak Peek. This looks fascinating. Get a sneak peek into the upcoming Remotional Intelligence Series, how the 15 emotional intelligence traits can help you creatively address readiness challenges, deliver optimum performance, build high trust teams, and communicate more effectively. And then on April 7th, we have a workshop called Navigating Risk and Change. You'll get 6 PDUs, 3 technical, 3 leadership. And the learning objectives will be understanding the project leadership value proposition, conquering risks, discussing critical paths and sometimes why nobody is managing it, how to eliminate risks by managing the critical paths, among other topics. And then on April 9th from 3 to 5, PNODN and Puget Sound Project Management Institute presents Shamelessly Undoing Bias by Dr. Joe Birkenholder. You'll learn the social science behind the approach, experience the techniques, and explore options for deploying this within your organization. And then we have another roundtable on April 26th from 5:30 to 7. And this will discuss preferred methodologies. So we're going to talk about the methodologies that your PMO uses. Have you gone fully agile or are you still waterfall? Which I may add, agile is a topic for tonight's presentation. So do you use phases and gates to periodically validate project progress and manage cost? And now I'm going to introduce our speaker, Brian Levy, and I'm going to stumble through this description, so forgive me. Brian Levy is the president of Bridgepoint Digital, an organizational optimization firm specializing in the validation of strategic approach via verification of strategic execution to the organizational strategy via metric management and appropriate alignment. While others in the industry have avoided metrics, Brian has been able to consistently improve productivity by over 30% within 6 months of operation verified with predefined metrics. He accomplished this through coaching executives through strategic planning and the pioneering techniques of portfolio management. As an avid fan of continuous improvement, Brian often takes the time to engage in executive coaching personally in order to learn new skills to transfer to his employees. However, his real joy is putting his Scrum at Scale trainer status to use in the classroom and training others in the techniques which lead to organizational optimization. That joy is often utilized via training underrepresented minorities in careers related to software development and using his 8-year-old daughter to explain management by acceptance. Wow. And now I'm going to introduce Brian, and I'm going to pass it over to him.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I almost didn't recognize that guy. So I'm going to share my screen here and get the presentation going. And today's topic is Agile for Everyone, an exploration of Agile outside of IT. And so I want to start off the presentation just by introducing a study. And this study comes from the State of Agile report. That report gets put out every year by a company called Digital AI. And what they do is they just go across the industry and they look for people that are actually practicing Agile, and they take statistics and information about it. And here's what they found out. You can see here in IT, information technology, 26% of the companies that they survey are using Agile inside of their IT department. Now, remember, IT has two major components. You have software development, which is mainly for new product development. And then you have all the other stuff, you know, your break fix, your maintenance, your ongoing dealing with hardware. And they found that 37% of the companies are actually using software development. Using Agile in software development. But if you notice on the right-hand side of the IT, 12% in operations, 7% in marketing, 6% in HR, 5% in sales. There is a lot of Agile going on outside of traditional IT, right? And so what I'd like to explore is the uses of it. In fact, I'll tell you, before we go to the next slide here, one of the major uses I've seen of Agile outside of IT has been in the realm of education. There's a technique. In fact, you can actually look this up. It's called training from the back of the room. And it's an educational technique in which teachers will actually bring in lots of different equipment, audio tapes. They'll bring in computer programs. They'll bring in worksheets, the books for students to study. And they let the students, one, get exposed to the learning objectives up front. And then two, the students get to choose their own adventure. They can choose the way that they want to learn. And some of the students will come in groups and they'll pick something of the artifacts that the teachers brought, and some of them will actually use the teacher. But they get to choose how they learn their objectives. It's an Agile technique for actually educating people in real life. So there's tons of Agile outside of IT. Now, before I go on, I want to actually canvas the group, make sure there's no big questions out there before I go to the next slide, because I want to make this as interactive as possible. So again, if you have any questions, just go ahead and type them in to the Q&A, and our moderator will actually go ahead and grab a question, read it to us, and I'll answer it as we go. That way you're actually involved as we go through our presentation.
Hey, Brian, we have a quick question here. Will the attendees receive the slides?
I believe that the PMI organization will make these slides available, and you'll be able to gather them from the website after the presentation's over.
And this is also being recorded in our YouTube channel and should be available in the next few days.
Oh, see, now you make me nervous. Any other big questions before we proceed?
There's other questions, but I think they'll be more appropriate from later on. They're specific to me.
Well, so let's do this.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go ahead and level set on what we mean by Agile. So Agile is a development approach, right? And it's for all different types of products, whether they be software, whether they be hardware, whether they be consumer products, any type of product you can imagine, Agile is good for it. it's an approach that incorporates iterations where you're doing the same type of development over and over again. I am planning, I'm doing my requirements, I am designing things, I'm implementing things, and getting continuous customer feedback. That's the most important part. Agile involves continuous testing. And we believe in actually taking a piece of the product, building that, and adding in additional pieces, adding on to the whole until the whole thing's done. As we add in each piece, we'll integrate it with the rest of the product. And the reason we do that is that in each time box, each iteration, we're able to put things in front of a customer to obtain the feedback. So we want to have something for the customer to use, because in Agile, we believe the best feedback comes from actually usage of the product. Agile is lightweight, adaptable to change, right? It doesn't have a bunch of rules. It presents a framework, an approach. And the idea is that the teams, the experts who are doing the work, they create their own rules, right? In that manner, it creates a self-managing, empowered group where they can collaborate and make quick, effective decisions together. So anything that meets this definition, that is Agile. Now, typically, what denotes Agile is, again, an approach that meets the definition and values and principles that are actually listed on the web at agilemanifesto.org. So I won't go into detail over these unless there's questions about it, but I just want to give a quick overview. In Agile, we believe that individuals and their skill sets, and the ways they communicate, their interactions, are more valuable and a greater determinant of success of a project than any sort of process, any sort of tool that could be provided. We also believe, and it says working software, ignore that software. When Agile was first developed, it was developed in the software realm, but we're going to change that word to product. And we believe in Agile that the best determinant of progress, of success, is actually seeing pieces of the product rather than actually seeing documentation, right? So most of your stage gates are geared towards reviewing documentation to see how far along we are. In Agile, if there's 100 features, you can only say you're 50% done if 50 features are actually working. Agile believes in customer collaboration. We know that the environment is going to change, and we want to do the right thing for our customers. So we believe in collaborating with them, even over anything dealing with the contract. We'd rather change things, change the contract, allow for the flexibility to make sure that the customer gets the value they want. And because we know that the environment will change, and therefore the customer's needs may change, Agile really believes in responding to change over following a plan. So one thing that usually denotes Agile is the things that we're working on right away. Those things will be heavily detailed and planned out. But things that are far out in the future, those are coarse grain plans. They haven't been developed yet, and they won't be until we're ready to actually implement it. So this is what denotes Agile. So let me pause for a second and make sure I canvass the group to see if there's any more questions.
Yes, Brian. There's a question here from Nicholas Sutton.
Mm-hmm.
So not questioning the effectiveness of Agile, but given that the methodology is not used by even a simple majority of surveyed companies, why does it seem to have such a big mindshare on project management?
Excellent question. One of the main principles in project management is getting rid of risk, right? We want to control risk. And what Agile does, and I'm going to forward to a slide here, Agile presents a risk control mechanism in two different ways. First, by actually doing things in iterations, what you do is you can try things out. So I have something risky, I can identify it. And what I'll do is I'll try to do a piece of it and see how it goes. And then I have because it's a time box, it forces you to review the results and figure out how to course correct. The second thing it does, in addition to this, that risk I just talked about, the iterations are control mechanisms for efficiency. This third bullet here, risk aversion decisions. What we want to do is actually boil everything into a hypothesis. In Agile, we believe everything we do on a project is about making decisions. And when we do that, what we want to do is make sure that we test out the decisions, test our hypotheses. In this way, Agile is really the implementation of the scientific method. And so Agile becomes popular, especially in project management, because lots of project management is about doing things for the first time that haven't been done before. You're exploring things. So we don't know exactly how to do it. And when you're in that situation, you want to check your decisions because you don't know what the right ones are. So you do a little bit and then you test it out and verify you're on the right path. And if it's not the right path, you course correct. And Agile is perfect to make that happen. So I hope that answers that question, but it sounds like there's another question that popped up. I answered that one.
Okay, I'm going to read a new question, Brian. So Kayla Quijas is asking about, I understand that Agile prioritizes a working product over documentation. I just integrated into an Agile-like team, and true to form, very little is documented. How do team members learn from other members of the team quickly if there is limited documentation? How do you navigate that lack of knowledge management?
Well, so I want to dispel a myth. One of the myths that's out there is that Agile kind of preaches against documentation, and nothing can be farther from the truth. There's two Agile principles that are at play. One is that we care more about working software over documentation, but we actually still care about documentation. The second thing that's at play is that we have a principle that the best form of communication is face-to-face. And so whenever possible, we try to actually have people talking to each other to convey information rather than documenting it. But that doesn't excuse or doesn't leave out the opportunity that if information needs to be recorded, because so much of it can be forgotten, that information should be documented. So we have a principle in Agile, and the principle is called the barely sufficient principle. And the rule behind this principle is that you want to have barely sufficient amount of documentation just so that you don't waste time and effort documenting things instead of actually working on the product. Whenever possible, I'll do things to document, like, instead of having a separate document, I'll let my test documentation equal the documentation I would have done for design or things like that. But again, you should choose, again, in Agile, the team gets to make the rules. You should choose the sufficient level of documentation that is right for your project.
Thank you, Brian.
Oh, no worries. So in Agile, there are many frameworks and many methods that fall under this Agile umbrella. You got lean software development, Scrum, the most popular, extreme programming, Kanban, Crystal, many different methods, right? And all these methods follow the Agile values and principles that we talked about earlier, right? So any of them work. And not only do they work in a software development and IT environment, but also in a non-software development, a non-IT environment. One of the biggest uses of Agile right now, we talked about education before, but there's also this new development called personal Kanban. And in personal Kanban, people actually manage their own personal lives, their own personal work in a Agile-like fashion. And they do that because usually there is a huge amount of work or things that we're responsible for. And you have to figure out what things you're not going to do. So you have to prioritize. And Agile is really good at forcing those prioritization type decisions, right? So again, any of these methods work, and they can be even used in your personal life. Now, let's talk about like one thing that really signifies Agile and kind of why it works this way, right? And for this, I'm going to bring up this picture here, which is of a report from the standards group called the Chaos Report. And they put this report out every single year. And what it shows, you can see here, out of all the features, all the functions that exist in products, they did a study and they figured out that 45% of the functionality that is in most software products, most non-software products, 45% of it, they're never used, right? Yeah, and it could be anything from electronics. I have a radio alarm clock that has like 12 different functions on it, but we bought it because it was an alarm clock. We use it for one thing, waking people up, right? Another part of this, you can see that 19% is rarely used, right? And so taken together, this is 64% that is either never used or rarely used. And the idea behind Agile, since we know this, we want to actually produce something, but take a tentative approach, meaning you produce a little bit and then you put it in front of the customers and get feedback, because we want to identify as early as possible before we build the whole product what parts are not going to be used, right? And if we can put it in front of customers, get the feedback and figure out what parts are not going to be used, again, 64%, if you can avoid building out all that work, that's like doubling your workforce, right? So you can get things done much cheaper, things done much faster with less resources. So really, what you're trying to do and what really signifies Agile is this constant customer feedback loop. And the goal is to figure out what parts that you assume that you needed to build that you don't actually have to build. That's the goal. In essence, when I'm doing that, I'm super focused on customer outcomes, on customer value. What did they want? The old way was pretty much to build things and then hope that I built the right thing and try to sell it, right? And we focus our teams and focus our workers on producing as much output as possible. And in Agile, what you're trying to do is make sure that you actually give value, that you produce the customer outcomes, that you actually accomplish the business goal, right? And I'd rather build less, but build the right thing. It's effectiveness over efficiency. That's what we want in Agile. All right, so let me pause for a second and canvas to see if there's any more questions over anything we've talked about so far.
Yes, Brian. Hong Sang is asking, would you provide an example of Agile project for operations?
Absolutely. I actually was on a very famous project for the Maui Development Pipeline in New Zealand. And that's the pipeline that actually moves oil and gas from the top of the North Island all the way to the bottom of the South Island. And inside of the operations, one thing we had to do was to install a new monitoring system. And the monitoring system, we had to hook up devices to the pipeline to measure the pressure, because if you had too little pressure, nothing would flow down the pipeline. But if you have too much pressure, boom, the pipeline explodes. And so part of the project we have for operations was to continuously install and check to make sure the sensors were working. So we had sensors on the pipeline. We monitored how much gas and how much oil was coming onto the pipeline at any time. And we also monitored how much gas and how much oil was coming off. And we had to make sure that there was a balance to maintain a constant pressure. And if for any reason we found that the pressure was not at the equilibrium, the safe range we wanted, part of the operations was to actually go ahead, call people that put things on the pipeline and take things off. We call them in, tell them that your government needs you, and you have to do what we say, either put things on and take things off so that we can equalize the pressure and we didn't have any problems. So that's like one example of agile project management inside of operations. Another thing that happens, just to give you another feel for this, I worked for a bank. And in this bank, we actually had customers that would call in and they actually just wanted questions answered. And so the customer service department actually used project management for their operations. They use Agile for it. And what they would do is they tried to take in the customer requests as they came in, but often there would be more questions than there were people to service them. And then they prioritize it. So they had a lead person who was a product owner who would actually take all the questions that couldn't be handled and actually prioritize which ones we could handle in what order, right? And that's how they ran it. They're using Agile project management. So hopefully those are some good examples that you can relate to about how Agile project management is used for operations. Any other questions before I move on?
Mauricio, did you see this other question? Or maybe it was already read. Would you provide an example of Agile project for operations?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think he just answered that one.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, no worries, no worries.
My bad.
No.
And then, so there's one here that I'd like to ask. What differentiates Lean from Agile in your mind? There's an earlier question.
That's an excellent question. So I'm gonna go to my Kaizen slide here. What Lean is an approach that says every process that you work on has a bunch of waste in it, no matter what process it is. And if you want to get more efficient, the best thing you could do is analyze the process, identify the waste, and then get rid of it. And once you get rid of that waste, you can apply the resources that were being applied to the waste and apply them towards something useful, making more of the value added part to the project. Well, in Lean, there's 7 different major types of waste they talk about. And here's where the crux of the question here. The difference between Agile and Lean is that Lean looks at all those wastes the same way. And in Agile, we believe there's one type of waste that is more evil, more egregious than all the other different types of waste. And that's the waste of over-processing. In other words, producing things that customers don't want. And so in Agile, again, we use a lot of the Lean principles and lean techniques, but we prioritize everything around figuring out what are the things that we think customers want, but they don't. And let's verify what they don't want and then not build it. So that's the major difference. Excellent question.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
Oh, no worries. Now, one thing I'm going to point out about Agile is that what denotes Agile from a lot of the other different methods that are out there is that in Agile, we truly believe that the team should be accountable for their own work. In most other forms of project management, we have a project manager who's the leader, and they're in charge and they're making decisions, and the decisions that they make are binding upon the people that are on the project team. In Agile, as you can see in the picture here, we have kind of the opposite. Our hero, our leader here, Batman, is actually serving everyone else, right? Because we believe that the people that are closest to the work are going to be better at making the decisions. And given that they're going to be better at making the decisions, we really want them to be in the lead. And so the leaders are just changing the environment to make it easier for the people that are closest to the work to do it. Right? Now, one thing I want to point out is when you're actually using Agile, like, and I use it for my home life, right? In my kitchen right now, there is a Kanban board. And what you'll see is that there's a list my family has of all the items that we need to actually take care of, with the highest priority items at the top and the lowest priority items at the bottom. And we developed this because early in my career, I was a consultant traveling 100% of the time. And so I would leave my house Monday morning and I'd come back Friday night. And there would be a list, a honey-do list of items that I was supposed to complete on the weekends. And what would happen is I would complete the wrong ones, right? I would complete the one at the top of the list, and I get yelled at because my family would tell me that number 17 was the most important. And why didn't you do that one? And if you really cared about it, you work on that one, right? And so what we did is we developed a system by which they always prioritize the list. And I promise, again, I may not be able to work on all 20 items on the list on the 2 days I was home on the weekends, but I would guarantee that I would actually finish off whatever's at the top of the list, at least number 1 and number 2. So as long as they prioritized it, the most important things got done, they could see me working and everyone was happy. And I constantly get feedback to make sure I was doing the right thing, right? What we find is that when you go through life, sometimes people, they think that the best way is to make these radical changes. But what we found is that when people are under duress, studies show, and I got this from Psychology Today, studies show that people's IQ actually decreases when they're under stress, right? We get stupider. So we don't want to make drastic changes. What we want to do when we do our projects is make continuous small changes. And that way our teams don't freak out. They don't lose their decision-making capabilities. Because again, when people are, when their IQ goes down, they make worse decisions. So you get a worse product, right? We found that the best way to avoid that is small continuous changes. And earlier, someone had asked the question about why is Agile project management so popular now? Like, they're like, it's everywhere. And I'm going to skip a slide here, and I'm going to tell you the secret because it's in this slide here. If you look at our workforce and what it's made of, 60% of the workforce right now are knowledge workers. Now, when I say knowledge workers, let me define this. Knowledge workers are members of the workforce whose main product, what they produce, is no longer a widget. Their main product is a decision. And often, they know more about their domain than their bosses. And because they know more about their bosses than their bosses in their domain, it's actually better for them to make the decisions than their bosses. So again, we want to push down the decisions to the people that are experts. And in today's society, with 60% of the workforce being knowledge workers, the experts are the ones that are closer to doing the work. So that's why the big change. Now, again, we've noticed this in all facets of life, right? In fact, one of the biggest uses of Scrum right now in Agile, I was talking to JJ Sutherland, who's actually the son of one of the creators of Scrum, but he was also one of the leaders, one of the executives at NPR, National Public Radio. And he actually brought Scrum into National Public Radio. And they actually produced their news stories using Scrum. Now, and their sprints are on a daily basis because they have to have a whole suite of information available and different every day of the week, right? And they use Scrum to do it. So again, plenty of applications outside of IT for the use of Scrum. Let me pause for a second just to make sure and check to see if there's any other questions out there.
Yes, Brian, we had a few questions, so I'm going to start with this one. It's a question from a member. Sometimes I hear the use of Agile, that we are an Agile team when it comes to responsiveness to a process. It's not a software or product team. It's a support and service team. So is that misused to say an Agile team? Wouldn't responsiveness be used in a lean method?
Well, you want responsiveness in both Agile and Lean. Now, keep in mind that Agile actually, its roots of it are Lean, right? And I'm going to go back to an earlier slide that I had up here with the car here. The thing that we care about in Agile is going the right direction. And so we do some things to see if we're in the right direction. And then we take a pause and we analyze to see, are we getting the results we want? And if we're not getting the results we want, then we can immediately course correct. We get the feedback and we go back to the way we were. So that's the essence of responsiveness, right? We actually want that. And we need to be more responsive to our customers. So Agile, it encompasses responsiveness also. All right, what other questions do we have? It sounds like there were a bunch.
Yes, so thank you, Brian. So from Jamie Shork, what tools or platforms do you recommend for home or independent Kanban or Agile work?
So I'll tell you, for homework, the best use of Agile is something that you can actually touch. People just respond to those things better. So in my kitchen, not only do I have a whiteboard, a dry erase board that we bought from a Home Depot. You can paste it up on the wall, but we also went to a local craft store and bought a poster board, and we have a separate Kanban board for our daughter. And in order to make it really fun, we actually took we had some decorations to it. So we made it into the shape of like a flower bed. And then as she moves, does the task that she needs to do, we actually move flowers across the Kanban board. And that way she can see the visual representation of the task she had to do. And if she moves enough flowers into the done column, then she gets a special treat at the end of the week. You know, maybe it's a ice cream or some junk food because we're pretty strict during the week. But I would recommend those for home use. As far as for work, if you, again, most of us are doing things remotely now. I think that some sort of software tool when you're working with people that are remote is essential. And I recommend something like digital AI. They have a tool called Agility. It used to be called version 1, but now it's called Agility. And the reason I recommend that is because it allows an infinite amount of nesting. So you can have many different layers. And in that way, you can have your whole strategy. So I may have my strategic goal, right? And then underneath that, I may have my strategic objectives. And then I may have initiatives. And then I may have features. And then I may have epics. And then I may have stories. And it allows as many layers as you want. That's why I recommend that tool. Wow, it looks like the number changed. There's another question.
Yeah, so I'm going to get to the next question from Susan Reynolds.
Okay.
What if the stakeholders have widely different ideas of what is most important?
Excellent question. Well, one of the fundamental principles we love to have in Agile, especially in Scrum, is this idea of a single person that actually interfaces with the people that are building the product. And if we have a single person, that person makes the decisions so that the team never has to stop and never have to worry about different opinions. They're getting one view from one person. Now, that one person often has the moniker of product owner. They're responsible for making the decisions on behalf of the stakeholders. And they get to choose, right? Now, we have a lovely nickname for that product owner. Sometimes we call them the one throat to choke or the single wringable neck because they need to figure out through analysis what direction they're going to go when there are divergent opinions. And they should use data to make those type of decisions. And usually if they make the wrong decisions and profitability goes down for the organization, then those monikers of single wringable neck and the one throat to choke, they come to fruition and they have a short career. But again, you want to handle it through one person. Well, I see the number moved again, so there's more questions.
Okay, so the next one is from Hong Sang.
Mm-hmm.
What is the difference between Agile project management and Scrum Master, and the pros and cons?
All right. So usually an Agile project manager is still considered to be kind of the lead for the team. And there's still the interface between the sponsor and the stakeholders and the actual project team. And that differs from a Scrum Master because usually a Scrum Master is really considered an equal member with the rest of the team. But their special role is to figure out what is preventing the teams from actually moving forward and being more efficient. And based on what's preventing the team from being more efficient, their job is to try to change the environment to actually make it easier for the team to move forward and to improve. Additionally, the Scrum Master role is centered on letting everyone know, here's what interactions you have that are helpful, and here's what interactions you have that are not helpful. And in that way, everyone learns how to use the Agile, how to use Scrum, and how to tailor the development process to something that will actually most benefit everyone involved. So again, you have a leader who's in charge versus kind of a servant leader who is everyone else is in charge of, so to speak. And that's the main difference between an agile project manager and a scrum master.
So Brian, we got 2 more questions. Would you like to answer them, or would you like to keep moving?
Yeah, let's go ahead and take them.
Okay. So Kate Hall Peace is asking about agility software.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's the question.
Yeah, so there are tons of agile software available, and they all have pluses and minuses to them. Again, I talked about the things that I like the most is having the flexibility to be able to nest and actually see all the work that you're doing and be able to trace it all the way up to the strategy of the company. That's what I value the most. However, and people have different values. Right? I also value flexibility, but if you're working with a team and the team isn't very disciplined or new to agile, maybe you need less flexibility. So again, you'll have to actually choose what software you actually want to use. Again, one of the most popular is probably Jira. Probably the second most popular is something like a rally, right? But yeah, you want to choose the one that's best for your team, and you have to kind of sort through. It's like a couple more questions.
Okay, so we have a question from Ricardo Garmendia.
Sure.
What is the role of the PM in Agile?
So the role of the PM in Agile is pretty similar to the role that the PM has in a non-Agile project. In other words, they're responsible for making sure that they take this unique endeavor that is clearly planned out, that is clearly executed, that is controlled and monitored, and that they interface and set expectations for stakeholders, right? Making sure that quality is there, that risks is mitigated so that the project can be delivered with the scope that's expected within the constraints that have been imposed by the stakeholders. So the role of the PM is pretty much the same. The only difference is the techniques they use. Now, in an agile environment, the underlying assumptions change. In a traditional project management environment, we sort of assume that the people that are, we sort of assume that the biggest thing we want to get rid of from a cost perspective is the time of the people. And so we onboard people as we have the work for them, right? And the opposite is true in Agile. We want to put a team together and keep the team together because we believe one of the greatest determinants of success is how well they communicate. And so we don't want them to go through the form, storm, norm, perform cycle over and over again. Better to get them up, get them communicating well, interacting, and at perform, and then ship work to the team as necessary. All right, looks like there's a couple more questions.
Yeah, so I'm seeing a question from Kavena. What are the main differences between Agile and disciplined Agile?
Well, as we discussed earlier, Agile is this umbrella approach that really focuses on iterating through and making sure that the customers are actually being pulled to get rid of waste, things that we were planned on building that they actually don't care about us producing. Disciplined Agile is just a method, one of several methods of how you can implement Agile. And it actually gives a set of best practice techniques that could be used to actually accomplish Agile. Now, keep in mind as we go through, one of the things that denotes Agile is that we want to actually get value to our stakeholders. We want to make this impact, right? We want to get them an outcome that they care about, right? And we're using the outputs that we produce, things that we produce, to convey that value. What Discipline Agile does is actually gives us techniques on how to actually do the creation of the outputs, what techniques to use to actually create the best outputs to convey that value to stakeholders. It looks like there's a couple more questions here.
No, I think that was it. Well, we have earlier ones from the panelists. Let's see, for example, do you have thoughts about how Agile can be employed in a heavily regulated industry as opposed to waterfall?
Absolutely. Now, what waterfall does is in an area where it's heavily regulated is waterfall tries to go and say, let's make meeting the regulations a project. We'll put some constraints on it and we'll try to meet this by the due date. Agile does sort of the same thing. The only difference is that in a heavily regulated industry, what Agile does is instead of actually kicking out the product at one time at the end, where you have this go, no go for meeting the regulations, Agile says, hey, let's time box the whole project. So let's continuously deliver pieces and meeting pieces of the regulation and add those in until we know that we've completed everything, right? Now, what typically happens in an Agile project when things are in a heavily regulated industry is that the regulations, the policies, the rules, they become acceptance criteria inside of the user stories, which are the requirements that we're using in an Agile project. So again, same thing. You can use it and you can use Agile in heavily regulated industries. You just need to make sure that those rules are encapsulated inside the acceptance criteria. Now, there was one thing we didn't talk about before I jump back to other questions. And the only other thing we didn't talk about is when you're oftentimes what happens and why people use Agile is that people split up budgets and they actually form silos where one organization does one thing, another part of the organization, another department may do another thing, and those things don't interact. They don't actually synergize to produce the goals for the big organization. And I want to make sure you understand how this happens. See, oftentimes organizations set goals and there's some basic assumptions or some foundational items, mental models, thought processes, and how we meet those goals. And what typically happens is that based upon these foundational items, the mental models, the assumptions, we make decisions about how to conduct the project. And the decisions that we make translates into the outputs and the activities that we actually build and conduct. Well, what typically happens when those mental models are not clearly articulated to everybody, well, if I don't know what the mental models are that came from the top of the organization, I'm responsible for an outcome. I make my own assumptions without having that information. And if I make my assumptions and those assumptions aren't clearly talked about, then you have one department over here with one set of assumptions. And then you have a different department over here with a different set of assumptions. And that's how silos get created. They're operating with one set of assumptions where a different group is operating with a different set of assumptions. And so what you want to do in Agile is you make these things explicit. We want to talk about what those assumptions are, and we want to go a step further. In our iterations, what we hope to do is to prioritize those assumptions by risk, by the probability that those assumptions are not true, and what impact they will have if they're not true. And every sprint, we should be testing out one of those assumptions. In fact, there's this concept called a sprint goal in Agile, especially in Scrum. And the sprint goal should really be testing out one of the assumptions to verify if it's true. And if we continuously do that, not only will we get rid of the silos, because we'll explicitly say, here are the mental models, the assumptions we're working from, but we prevent our organization from actually working off of false assumptions, because we've tested out what the riskiest ones are. So now we verify, here are the right things, and we're working from the same information and factual information, so we don't go awry. That's what Agile does for you. All right, let me pause for a second, because I think there were more questions.
Yes, Brian, we have a couple of questions here. So another one from Kavena. Do you see a place for Agile in a regulatory body to create regulations?
So I got to tell you about one of the projects that I'm most proud of. One of my, I actually led the first Agile project at Nationwide Insurance that was outside of IT, and it was inside of their standards underwriting department. So again, the underwriters have to figure out how to write policies, and there are legal implications. There's certain rules they have to follow for how they price things out, but then they also have to take into account of risk, right? And so they have to actually figure out what criteria they're going to use for underwriting and how they're going to price things out every so often. So I actually led a project, one of the first ones outside of IT, to actually revamp the underwriting criteria and the pricing that they were using to write the policies, right? Again, heavily regulated environment and outside of IT. And the results of that project, typically, they said that those projects take 3 years to actually complete. And we were able to get it done in 9 months. So it was phenomenal. It was a game changer for Nationwide. It was one of the best times I've had, because Nationwide is a great company and it was a great team that I worked with. But again, just wanted to illustrate, yes, there is a place for Agile, and it can be used in these regulatory type environments, right?
So Brian, actually, I have a question regarding this last slide. You talk about silos. This is a cultural thing. So I would guess that a company would have to have something like these concepts to make sure that they're the same throughout all their organization, and something like a core values document or something like that. Is that how you would communicate this to your whole company, or how would you do that?
Well, what you want to do is not institute it through documents per se. Those things help to make it visible, to remind people of different things, but that's not the primary way that you want to communicate it.
Okay.
The primary way you want to communicate it is through performance management.
Okay.
So what I want to do is I want to have my managers over here. I want to have my manager, when they communicate with their workforce, with their employees, I want them to really tell their employees, here are the concepts that you should care about. And I want to change the way they do performance management. So typically, I know I was taught when I first became a manager, that you can't manage attitudes. You can only manage behavior. And so most performance management is geared towards looking at different behaviors that people conduct, and we get feedback on it, right?
Mhm.
Now, some of the modern techniques, now that we have a workforce that is mostly knowledge workers, they've evolved to say, hey, if you're a knowledge worker and your output is making decisions about what behavior you should have, then we don't want you deciding to just do these same behaviors. If you get information and you make a decision that this is the optimal way to go, then I'm going to judge you by the output, not by your behaviors. And now we've evolved even more than that. And we're saying, hey, if you're a knowledge worker, you get paid to make decisions. Then as a manager, what I should do is help manage the decisions that you make. Now you're making them, but I want to create an environment where it's easier for you to make them and where we capture those decisions. Right? So if you work for a company like BlackRock, what they do is they tell their employees up front, when you work for this company, your job isn't to execute trades and to try to make more money for our customers. Your job is to build our knowledge management system with the right algorithms so that the computers can make all the trades. So the managers are managing the decision-making process of what goes into the algorithms so that the computers can actually do this stuff. And this is a total different focus than our traditional workforce when you look at it from an agile perspective. A shift away from behaviors and toward decisions. How's that? Did that help?
That totally helped. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 3 more questions, Brian. Would you like to answer them as well?
Sure.
Okay, we have a question from Ravi. Has Agile been found successful in infrastructure projects where there is clearly defined user features, stories, task, and the end result?
Absolutely. In fact, I told you about my experience with the Maui development pipeline, but the beginning of my career was actually with AT&T. And I was the manager of one of the central office switches. So those are the big supercomputers that actually transfer all the calls from one place to another. And in the central office, what we would have to do is bring in new computers. Every time there was a new product, there'd be a new piece of equipment that had to go into our central office. And I had to build that infrastructure. I was also responsible for ISDN service. So making sure that ISDN, one of the, I don't know, older technology now, but was actually hooked up for, throughout Washington, Oregon, and Arizona. And again, this was all infrastructure, and we use Agile to do it, right? So yes, Agile can be used for infrastructure, and it is used for a lot of infrastructure right now.
Okay, thank you, Brian. So another question from Ravi as well.
Mhm.
How can Agile be used effectively for a portfolio of projects? He feels that, oh, sorry.
For
Yeah.
portfolio projects?
Yes, and there's a second sentence to his question. So he feels that Agile is more effective in context of one project or one product.
So this goes back to this picture here, right? So remember I told you that there is this hierarchy, and I want to make sure this is a difficult concept, because lots of people, when they discuss Agile, they don't discuss this. What Agile really boils down to, what we talked about, is the scientific method. I don't know exactly what the solution should be in the beginning of the project. If I did, I probably shouldn't even use Agile. I should use Waterfall, right? But I only choose an Agile because I believe I have a complex problem where I don't know all the requirements. I don't know all of what the solution should be. And when I'm in that space, the only way to solve it is by trial and error. You know, people use fancy words like empiricism, but what it boils down to is I know what outcome I want down here. And I know where I'm starting. Because I don't know where all the requirements are, and I don't know what all the solution is, all I can do is note that there's a gap between where I'm starting and where I want to end up. And so what I do is I do some things, I try it out to try to manage the gap, to get closer. And I try to move and I try to get closer and closer, right? Well, if I'm managing a portfolio, think about what a portfolio is. A portfolio is just a basket of projects, operations, programs that I'm using to accomplish some sort of big strategic goal for the company. So I have this goal, this outcome I want for the company. And again, it's complex. I don't know exactly how I'm actually going to solve it, right? I have this project and I think this project is going to take this piece. So what I should do is take the goal, the outcome, and I break it down. Instead of having a work breakdown structure, I need to create an outcome breakdown structure. Right? And this piece of the outcome, I'm actually designating project 1 to take care of. Right? And what I should do is I have a metric to note, am I getting closer to that outcome? Right? And then I have operations over here. And I have a metric to that one. Right? Now keep in mind, I got this overall big goal over here that I'm trying to reach. So I look to see if each one of the individual pieces of my portfolio are actually moving toward the metrics, the objectives I have for them. And simultaneously, I'm looking at, well, do these pieces, are they actually getting me closer to the big strategic outcome that I want? Right? And this format that I have here of outcomes, assumptions, decisions, and activities, I'm keeping the same format. And I do this for the big goal that I have, the strategic goal, but also at the project level, at the operations level, right? And I'm doing tiny experiments to see, is there a relationship, a strong relationship between each of these individual pieces and the actual attainment of the big strategic outcome that I'm going for. And so that's what an agile portfolio manager looks at. Does that make sense?
Yes, is what they're saying.
Perfect. All right, I think we're ready for the next question.
Oh, we got a few more.
We're running out of time.
So Brian, we're over time here. So
Okay.
And we have a request from the audience to complete the rest of the presentation that was planned. So how
Okay.
about we complete the presentation and do the raffle, and then whoever has questions can stay back with Brian and we can complete those questions. How does that sound?
Technically, we have till 8:30, so we do have some time. But I would continue with the presentation a little bit and then answer a few more questions.
Well, the good news is that as we were answering questions, I actually was going through the presentation. So there's only 2 more slides that we haven't touched on yet. We talked about the silo piece, and one thing that denotes agile is this concept of there being a one team mentality. And often what happens in organizations when you're not using agile, we talked about developing those silos where it's us versus them. Well, now we're moving to this realm of one team. And nowhere is this actually exemplified more than a lot of the nonprofits that we have out here. So we'll have these, these nonprofits, especially NGOs, these non-government organizations that have a mission to alleviate hunger or to actually prevent the spread of malaria in different countries. And they actually use more of an agile approach where they actually have a problem, a goal that they have in mind. They have some assumptions of how they actually are going to reach it. And what they do is they have more than one team in different places. And they'll actually allow autonomy to the individual teams to figure out how they're going to do their piece to, one, help things locally, while two, contributing to the overall goal of the entire organization. So again, in summary, because we've moved into this environment where most of our workforce are decision makers, people outside of IT are finding more and more usefulness in an agile approach, because again, what signifies the knowledge workers of the world is that the primary thing they look at is making decisions. And what Agile does, and I showed this in the earlier slide, what Agile does is it has a decision or hypothesis that you keep testing. So I make a decision and I test it out to make sure it's the right decision so I can course correct, right? That's what denotes Agile, and that's why it's being used so much outside of IT. So that actually completes the presentation and all the slides. I'm open to it, if there's time for any other questions that we have.
Yeah, we still have a few questions in the queue.
Oh, sure.
Okay, so Ajay is asking, how do you communicate to stakeholders who are in a silo structure to come up with common goals and to get an agile type project agile type project with delivery value-based outputs? Does that make sense, or should I read the question again?
Plenty of sense, and I'm going to say an answer that is going to be a little bit unpopular. And the answer to this is that we want people to have alignment. That's what makes Agile work, is alignment. That's what gets the productivity out of everyone. But alignment, I think in today's day and age, we've allowed so much autonomy to people that we're actually trying to convince them to be aligned when they're in the organization. And if you truly to be successful, what should happen is that there is an overall mission, that overall vision that we have at the top of the organization, and it should be decomposed and delivered throughout the organization. So it shouldn't be so much that we're trying to convince people to get aligned and to convince people to get out of the silos, as really we should be demanding that they not be in the silos. Like, you work for the organization, so we should be accomplishing the organization's goals. Now, again, as we talked about before, and I showed on this slide, the reason the silos come about is because of these assumptions that aren't explicit. So we haven't been disseminating the information. And so on the earlier questions we had about agility tools, one reason I'm such a big fan and proponent of having the tools is you need an easy way to document the mental models, the assumptions that we have, and how they contribute to the common goal, and get that information out to everyone. If we do that, you can get rid of the silos. Unfortunately, there hasn't been enough effort to actually make sure that we've communicated those things enough. And that the result is that we have the silos.
Brian, I think right now would be a good spot to go to the raffle. And would you be able to type in your email into the chat? Any questions left? Are you okay with attendees emailing you the questions and you answering them, or through LinkedIn?
Absolutely.
Do we have any time for any more questions? I noticed we had 1 or 2 left. If you want to do 1 or 2, I think we have a little bit of time. It's 8:15, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, maybe just one or two more. I think that's time. And
Okay.
folks ask questions. So
okay. So Brian, there's another question from Ricardo Garmendia.
Mhm.
So a hybrid project can include both predictive and agile methodologies, correct?
That is correct. And not only is it correct, you want that, right? I often talk about a continuum. And the continuum I have is if you got pure agile over here, and you have waterfall over here, or planned or predictive, right? And the more discipline you have, and the more skill your people have, the more you can go to the agile side. But the less skill you have, the less skill your people have, and the less discipline they have to follow rules, they have to drift toward the waterfall side. So yeah, you can't. You in a lot of cases you do want a hybrid. It's actually optimal based on the people that you have in your organization. So you can't do both.
Okay, Brian, one last question from home.
Mhm.
What agile certification do you recommend? I am aware of a few in the market: agile practitioner, scrum master, etc.
So I have to admit, as I was introduced in the introduction, I'm a Scrum at Scale trainer, and the reason I like Scrum at Scale is because in the true nature of Agile, you should have very few rules about how you actually conduct everything. And I found that Scrum at Scale adheres to those Agile values the most. There's very few rules. The Scrum at Scale guide, if you look at it, it's like 20 pages, right? And if you look at all the other methodologies out here for Agile, there's tons and tons and tons of pages to read. And, that can't be Agile. So the Scrum at Scale recommendation, Scrum at Scale certification is the one I would recommend because, again, I think that the methodology is truer to Agile roots. And most of the other certifications out here teach you how to work with one team, right? Your basic CSM tells you how to work with one team. But the reality for most of the environments you're in is you have to work with more than one team. And Scrum at Scale was designed to teach you how to work with teams of teams. And that's what you really need in today's market.
Thanks again, Brian. Those were all the questions.
All right.
So I think we can move on to the conclusion and the raffle.
Well, thank you all for your time and attention. And I put my my email in the chat, so I look forward to conversing with you. And thank PMI for having me out.